At the time, I thought I was finally doing something healthy. I thought honesty would make my relationship stronger, and I thought home was still the one place where I was safe. I was wrong about both. I'm 25F. My now ex-boyfriend is 25M. We had been together for a little over 2 years when this happened. I also still live at home with my mom and my younger siblings while I save money to move out, which matters more than I wish it did. This whole situation feels like two separate disasters that somehow collapsed into each other at the worst possible time. For context, my boyfriend, Adrian, and I had what most people would probably call a good relationship with communication issues. He was affectionate, attentive, and intense, not intense in a romantic movie way. More in a, I need to know what you're feeling, but only if it confirms I'm not being threatened kind of way. At first, I interpreted that as passion. He wanted reassurance. He wanted closeness. He wanted us to be one of those couples who tell each other everything. I liked that in the beginning. I liked feeling chosen. The problem was that everything only felt safe when my feelings were convenient. If I said something loving, he'd say I was the most emotionally mature person he'd ever dated. If I said something complicated, he would go cold, not screaming, not chaos, just that awful, careful silence that makes you feel like you're standing on thin ice. He also had a habit of punishing first and discussing later. He'd disappear for hours, answer in one-word texts, or suddenly become too tired to talk. Then, once I was anxious enough, he'd finally engage, usually from a position where I was already apologizing. I'm embarrassed by how long it took me to call that what it was. A few nights before my birthday, we were lying in bed talking. It was one of those late-night conversations that feels unusually honest. The room was dim, both of us half tired, half open. I remember feeling weirdly hopeful. At one point, I told him there was something I wanted to say, but I needed him to just hear me out and not assume the worst. He said, okay, so I told him the truth. I told him that I loved him deeply, that I didn't want anyone else, that I was not fantasizing about dating or sleeping with other people. But I admitted that sometimes I missed being single. Not men, not hookups, not options. Just the feeling of being fully alone inside my own decisions. The feeling of not having to emotionally account for another person every time I wanted a quiet day, a changed plan, a bad mood, an unscheduled evening. The freedom of not walking into every vulnerable conversation already bracing for fallout. The second the words left my mouth, I knew he had translated them into something else. His whole body changed. He pulled away slightly and asked, "So what? You want to act single?" I tried to explain immediately. I said no. I said that was exactly what I was trying to avoid, that I wanted to say this out loud because hiding it would turn into resentment later. I told him I thought honesty was the responsible choice. He laughed once, but not in a nice way. Then he said, "That's a creative way of telling me you want out." He left my apartment that night. Not dramatically. He just got dressed in silence, grabbed his keys, and walked out while I kept asking him not to do this right before my birthday. The next day was my birthday. He ignored me until late afternoon. When he finally called, it wasn't to talk. It was to tell me we were done. He said he wasn't going to be with someone who wanted relationship benefits with single girl freedom. He said I had basically admitted I wanted other men, even though I had very explicitly said the opposite. He also canceled the weekend trip he'd planned and told me he didn't care what day it was, because the truth doesn't get a birthday pass. I cried through most of that phone call. And then I cried through most of my birthday. What makes it worse is that by the end of the call, I was apologizing. Not because I thought I had cheated, not because I thought I had lied, but because I was so desperate for him to stop treating my honesty like betrayal that I started shrinking my own meaning just to calm him down. That's when I should have understood I was not in a conversation. I was in a trial. Now, for the second disaster. Around that same time, I had already been dealing with something deeply unsettling at home. I'm the oldest of 4 siblings. My younger brother Milo is 15. For a while, I noticed small things disappearing from my room. At first, I thought I was losing track of my laundry. A camisole, a pair of shorts, then underwear, then a bralette I knew for a fact I had folded and put away. I live in a busy house. Things move around. People borrow chargers and hoodies and never return them. So I tried to be reasonable. But then my mom found some of my missing things in Milo's gym bag while she was looking for his wet swim stuff. Not just one item, several. I don't even know how to describe the feeling of that. It wasn't just anger. It was this gross, immediate sense of being watched in a place where I had assumed basic safety. When we confronted him, he lied. First, he said the things weren't mine. Then he said maybe they got mixed in from the laundry. Then he said a friend gave him some of it as a joke. None of that made sense, especially because I removed the tags from most of my clothes and I recognized the items instantly. My mom tried to make it gentle. She offered him an easy way out. She even told him that if he was experimenting with clothes or identity or anything else, no one was going to shame him. He just needed to stop taking my things. He still lied. And then he kept doing it. That's the part I can't get past. It wasn't one weird mistake followed by embarrassment. It continued after he knew I knew. After he knew I felt violated, after my mom had already spoken to him. Once I realized that, I started feeling tense in my own room. I began mentally tracking what was clean, what was in my drawers, what was missing. I hated that. I hated that my home had turned into a place where I felt the need to monitor my own underwear like evidence. And all of this was happening while my boyfriend was punishing me for telling the truth. So there I was, birthday ruined, relationship imploding, and home no longer feeling fully safe. What really broke me was the contrast in how people responded. When Adrian reacted to my confession, his stance was basically, "You made me feel insecure, so your intentions no longer matter." When Milo got caught stealing from me, my mom's stance slowly became, "He's young, he's embarrassed, you need to move on." Somewhere in between, I started noticing a pattern in my life. Everyone wanted me to be understanding, but very few people wanted to understand me. A couple of days after my birthday, Adrian and I had one more phone call. I told him that the reason I sometimes missed feeling single was because I often felt like I was managing his reactions. I told him I loved him, but I didn't feel emotionally safe being honest with him. I said that the relationship had started to feel like I was constantly trying to prevent explosions that he insisted were not explosions. He got quiet for a second. Then he said, "So now I'm abusive because I have standards?" I never used that word. I told him that wasn't what I said. He responded with, "You want freedom? Congrats, now you have it." And that was it. Meanwhile, the situation with Milo got worse before it got better. A week after we first confronted him, my mom found more of my things hidden in the back of his closet. That was when I stopped trying to be delicate. I told him directly that he had made me feel unsafe and disgusting in my own house. I told him I didn't care what the reason was anymore. He had lied repeatedly and kept violating a boundary after I made it explicit. He cried then, finally. Not huge dramatic sobbing. More like the face of someone realizing the problem was no longer containable. He admitted he had taken the clothes. He said he didn't know why he kept doing it after getting caught. He said he kept telling himself he'd stop and then didn't. My mom wanted that confession to be the end of it. For me, it was just the beginning of realizing how damaged my sense of trust had become. Because trust doesn't come back the second someone admits the truth. And that's what both of these situations had in common. With Adrian, the issue wasn't just the breakup. It was that I had offered vulnerability and he turned it into accusation. With Milo, the issue wasn't just the stealing. It was that he watched me feel violated and still chose to continue until it became impossible to deny. Both of them, in different ways, had made my feelings seem secondary to whatever story protected them best. Update 1, 1 week later. Adrian texted me, not to apologize. Not really. He said he had been deeply hurt and that maybe he overreacted slightly, but that he still felt what I said was disrespectful to the relationship. Then he added that if we ever spoke again, I would need to be clearer in how I present things, which is honestly one of the most revealing messages I've ever received. Not, I'm sorry I weaponized your honesty on your birthday. Not, I should have asked questions. Just, next time, package your truth more carefully so I don't punish you for it. I didn't respond. Update 2, 3 weeks later. Milo has stopped taking things, at least as far as I can tell. My mom helped me get a lockbox for certain clothes and documents, which feels ridiculous, but also practical. Home is calmer, not healed, but calmer. As for Adrian, enough distance has passed that I can finally admit something I couldn't admit on my birthday. When he broke up with me, part of me felt relieved. Not relieved that I was hurt, relieved that I no longer had to translate my own mind into something harmless before speaking. And that realization is changing me. I'm starting to understand that peace is not the same thing as silence, and honesty is not wrong just because someone else cannot tolerate it. I still feel sad. I still feel weird in my own house some days. I still lock my door at night. But for the first time in a while, I'm no longer rearranging myself around other people's comfort and calling that love. If there's any good thing I can take from this whole mess, it's this. I used to think betrayal had to be dramatic to count. Now I know it can also look like this. Being punished for telling the truth, being asked to move on before you feel safe, being treated like your boundaries are inconvenient instead of real. And I'm done pretending those things are small. This concludes today's story. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed it, consider subscribing to support our work.